الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we are commemorating the death, or rather I should say the martyrdom, of one of our Imams, one of the grandsons and the heirs of the purity and the piety, the nobility and the leadership of our Prophet, and that is our sixth Imam, Imam Jafar ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhim as-salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And among our Imams, there is a special manifestation of the wisdom and the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt that we see in Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, which makes his legacy unique for us, because although we believe that all of our Imams, and in fact all of the Ma'asumeen, they were infallible, they were protected by Allah from sin and mistake and deviation, but there were different aspects of their noble characters that showed themselves in the life and in the person of different members of the family of the Prophet. That is why there is something special about our first Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhim as-salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That he was a role model and a source of inspiration even for our later Imams. Imagine that our fourth Imam, to society he was known as Sayyidus Sajideen, the prince of all of those who prostrate their heads towards Allah. Zainul Abideen, the adornment of those who worship. His recitation of Quran, his performance of Salah, his recitation of dua and munajat would be so beautiful and so inspiring that it was a title by which he was known, not only among his family and his lovers, his followers and his Shia, but even among the general population of Medina and the general community of the believers. They all, even if they didn't recognize him as the Imam, and the majority of the Muslims did not, but they considered him to be a role model of piety and purity. So for the Ummah, he was a Sajjad, he was Dhu Thafanat, he was Sayyidus Sajideen, he was Zainul Abidin. Each of these titles, they indicate the admiration people had for his worship. But then Imam Zainul Abidin himself, after engaging in a night of worship, would say, bring for me the book in which we have written the ibadah of my grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Just a reminder for myself, when we gather to remember Ahlul Bayt, what we say and what we speak of is only one part of our expression of our love and attachment to Ahlul Bayt. These gatherings are an opportunity for us to send our salutations and say salawat on the Prophet and his progeny as frequently as possible. Because whatever I may say, whatever you may say or listen to, that is on one side of the equation, but just the performance of this ibadah and the recitation of this dua itself is something that cleanses our heart and our soul and protects us from hypocrisy and nifaq. And so let us recite a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad. That is not the punctuation or an afterthought in our program. That is front and center in our connection to Ahlul Bayt and our expression of our love and our obedience to them. So our fourth Imam would say that bring for me the book in which we have written the ibadah of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And that tells us, first of all, that it was an honored tradition to write and to remember and then to speak about the character, the practice, the prayer, the worship of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And more than his own worship, which the entire Muslim Ummah considered to be a role model, Imam Zainul Abidin was inspired by the memory and the speaking of the worship of Imam Ali. And after the book was brought as an honored possession and tradition, and it was mentioned, then Imam Zainul Abidin said that who is it that can worship Allah and has the strength to do what Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhim as-salam did in worship and obedience for Allah. So you see that this is the way in which Ahlul Bayt, they manifested those most sublime characteristics. Amir al-Mu'mineen, many people associate him with courage, associate him with justice, but he was also unique and he was admired by Ahlul Bayt themselves because of how sublime and how great was his ibadah. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, he manifested one facet, one dimension of Islamic teaching in a way that even the other Imams did not manifest as clearly. Not because they were not ma'soom, not because they did not reflect the character of the Prophet and his teachings and his practice, but because the life of Imam Ali allowed certain aspects, certain facets, certain dimensions of the teaching of the Prophet to be visible and inspiring for humanity in a unique way. So, the same is true about the third Imam, the Prince of Martyrs, Sayyid al-Shahadat, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He manifested the devotion to Allah and the spirit of sacrifice and the source of salvation of the Ummah in a very powerful manner that is unique not just in Islamic history, but in the entire history of humanity. When it comes to our sixth Imam, Imam Jafar ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What we have in a very unique manner, is a manifestation of the knowledge and the wisdom that is derived from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His revelation to Prophet Muhammad. And so the source of the strength of this ummah and the source of the salvation of this ummah, which is to learn from and be guided by Islam. The job of the Prophet, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. If the Prophet recites to us the verses and the signs of Allah, it is to teach us scripture and wisdom. The Prophet taught, but much of what the Prophet taught was not understood, or it was not accepted by his companions and by the ummah at large. Either they were not ready and not willing, or they were not capable of receiving and understanding. That ta'aleem and that guidance which came to humanity through the revelation of Allah to His Messenger in the Quran and in the understanding of the Quranic scripture, which was passed through the generation of Ahlul Bayt after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, sallu ala Muhammad wa that reached its greatest manifestation and visibility in the time of and through the efforts of our sixth Imam, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And to appreciate this, I want to just briefly speak about the landscape of the Islamic world. So generally we say that there are two main schools of thought within Islam. There is the school of Ahlul Bayt, which in reality is the authentic and the genuine practice and teaching and understanding of Islam which came from our Prophet. And then there is what is known as the Sunni school of thought. Unfortunately, sometimes it is called orthodox or it is called mainstream, although neither of those two titles is an accurate description of the reality of these two schools of thought and their relationship to each other and their relationship to the Prophet. So let us begin with the landscape of the larger of the two schools of thought, known as the Sunni school of thought. Is it one school of thought? Is it united? Well, you can look at three different areas: in law, in doctrine or belief, and in spirituality. In law, as everyone is familiar, the Sunni school of thought admits different schools of law. So there are some who are Hanafi, the followers of Abu Hanifa. Others are Maliki, the followers of the school of Malik ibn Anas, the jurist of Medina. Others are Shafi'i, the followers of Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, who spent his academic career in Hijaz, in Medina, and in Egypt. And there are others who are Hanbali, the followers of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who flourished and taught in Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliph. And these four schools of thought, although they have differences, both in their rulings and in the way in which they understand the teachings of Islam, the Sunnah of the Prophet, the principles that they use to derive the laws of Islam, and they are in mutual conflict in many different issues, but they are considered to be equally legitimate as schools of law and practice within the classical Sunni conception. Now what you have today is that many people, they don't follow one madhab or one school of law specifically, but they kind of shop around and say that if the Hanafis say you need to eat dhabiha, which is in accordance with the teaching of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, but then maybe the Malikis or maybe the Shafi'is or the Hanbalis, they have a little bit more of a lenient ruling, then maybe I'll be Hanafi in terms of my prayer, but I will follow the other ruling in terms of my diet so that I can eat at whatever restaurant I want. And I can say that even if the food is not slaughtered by a Muslim, but it is kosher, or it might not be dhabiha, then I will still be able to eat it. So this choice, is it based on research or an understanding that, for example, Ahmad ibn Hanbal was more learned than Abu Hanifa? Or is it based on simply a general idea that, you know what, these are 4 different schools of law. We have no way of knowing who is more right, so you can follow whichever one you want. Classically, people would follow one of the 4, but because there is no basis or no principle for choosing, there's no reason to limit yourself to those 4, and there's no reason for you to follow one of the 4 faithfully. And so what ends up happening, and many of you may be familiar with this reality, that Muslims end up choosing the easiest ruling. And that becomes a race to the bottom. Not because Sharia is meant to be difficult, but because if Allah sent this revelation, and if our Prophet taught that there are rules of prayer, and there are rules of diet, and there are rules of purity and purification and inheritance, then He didn't just want us to choose randomly or to choose on the basis of what is easiest. That revelation was sent as Allah's command, as divine law, for us to try to understand that which is the most authentic. And even if we can't have perfect knowledge, to get us as close as possible to what Allah has commanded and what Allah wants of us. So one area of Islam is the law, and the Sunni school of thought does not have one school of law, but rather it has at least 4 schools of law, at least classically, and there is no real basis by which you can say that you should choose one, or one is more authentic or more correct than another. Now, what sometimes people will say is that yes, there's differences in schools of law, but there is one aqeedah. So is there one school of aqeedah, doctrine, or belief among Ahlus Sunnah? Now, classically, those people who would call themselves Sunni, they would follow either the Ash'ari school of theology, or more prevalent in the past, less prevalent but still present today, the Maturidi school, or the Athari school, which is to follow the Athar or the Ahadith that speak of the issues of belief and doctrine. And at one time there was a Mu'tazili school, but that was largely marginalized in Islamic history, and some people, they may be trying to revive it within the Sunni community today. But just like there is not one school of law, there is not one school of doctrine or belief, because the Athari school, the Ash'ari school, the Maturidi school, and if we add it, the Mu'tazili school, they have differences. So if we say, is there one belief that the Sunni school is characterized by about the attributes of Allah, or even whether it is correct to say that Allah has a body or does not have a body? Na'udhu billah, these are fundamental questions. and they are at the very heart of Tawheed and our principles, but there is not one belief or one doctrine that you can say, this is the doctrine of Ahlul Sunnah. Even many of those things that are well known, like a belief in Adalatul Sahaba, that all of the companions of the Prophet, they are just or they are adil. There might be a majority opinion, but there is not one opinion. So the law is not unified. The doctrine and the beliefs are not unified. What about spirituality? Well, spirituality throughout Islamic history has been expressed through the Sufi schools and teachers. And you will find that there are both opinions in favor and against Sufism among the most famous classical scholars of Sunni Islam in history until today. Some will say it is bid'ah, it is an innovation, it was not from the Prophet, it is not authentic, and therefore it must be avoided. And others will say that once you know your aqeedah and once you know the teachings of Sharia, your beliefs and your practices, then you enrich your spirituality through tariqah and through the teachings of Sufism. So in terms of law, in terms of doctrine, and in terms of spirituality, there is not one principle that you can say this is what binds and what unites Ahlus Sunnah and makes it a single school of thought. And this is where we come to our Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, and the importance of his role. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Because the reality is that the most firm and the most cohesive opposition to the wrong decisions and turns that were made by the governments and by their followers in Islamic history was represented by the lovers and the followers of Ahlul Bayt. And in reality, the broader consensus that developed among the Muslims who followed their governments in their mistakes and in their deviations, that was not something that was based on a unifying principle. Instead, it was based in the opposition to Ahlul Bayt. So if I want to know what is it that unites that majority school of law or school of thought within Islam, historically it is not wrong to say that it was opposition to Ahlul Bayt and to their political, religious, theological, and legal teachings, which were always a source of opposition and animosity by those who wish to use Islam for their own worldly or their own political purposes. And that is why you and I, we are known as Ja'fari. Because the school of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam is an affirmative school, not based in opposition to what others did, but based in the preservation of the genuine teachings, the authentic doctrine, laws, practice of Islam as revealed by Allah to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa recorded in the Quran. It was preserved, it was taught, it was practiced by Ahlul Bayt. But until the time of our sixth Imam, it was practiced on a limited scale, and it began to be publicly taught and spread only from the time of our sixth Imam. So that school which was directly taken from the teachings of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, that became known as the Ja'fari school. And it is not a school of law, but it is a school of law and a school of doctrine, and it is a school that represents the comprehensive teachings of Islam as a whole. And then those who did not follow Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq as their Imam in all areas of Islam, it is no coincidence that they too were all directly or indirectly students and beneficiaries of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Sometimes people ask that question, that what do you mean when you say that Abu Hanifa was for 2 years a direct student of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq? His fiqh is not the fiqh of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. What does it mean when we say that Imam Malik, because he lived in Medina and he was from the same city of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, and in his book Muwatta, sometimes directly but more often indirectly when he speaks of the consensus of Medina, he also refers to the teachings of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, but his fiqh is not the fiqh, and his teachings are not the teachings of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. And then Shafi'i, we will say, is a student of Imam Malik, so an indirect student of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal was a student of Imam Shafi'i, so an indirect student of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq through Shafi'i, who was a student of Malik, a direct contemporary and beneficiary of the knowledge of our sixth Imam. So what does it mean? Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik were two direct students of the sixth Imam. Shafi'i was an indirect student, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal was twice removed an indirect student. But none of them, their teachings represent fully the teachings of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. What does it mean for them to be students? What it means is that it was Ahlul Bayt who preserved Islam and set the tone for what direction the Ummah as a whole will take, so that even their opponents and even those who were not willing to formally accept the teachings of the Imam, they were living in a religious and a spiritual reality that was guarded and that was protected from going beyond the extremes of deviation by Ahlul Bayt. And let me explain that with one example. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Just as an example and not in detail, but many members of the school of Ahlul Sunnah, they believe that Ahlul Bayt had a special spirituality. And they admire the schools of Sufism or Tasawwuf. They call it tariqah, or a spiritual path, which is built upon sharia or law and aqidah or belief. Now, what is that spiritual school? You find a teacher known as a murshid or a pir. That murshid is somebody that you do bay'ah to. You pledge allegiance to follow their teachings without question. They believe that there is a perfect human being who is the pole of humanity around which the guidance of humanity revolves. What you will find is that this is a watered down or a diluted, or we can say a somewhat deviated expression of the belief in and the position of the Imam for humanity. In other words, once the teaching of Imamat came and was propagated by our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When the Prophet said, Man kuntu mawlahu fahada aliyun mawlah, then initially somebody may object and say, Hasbuna kitabullah. We have the book of Allah. We will choose our own leaders. We will have a consensus and we will find a political leadership. But that leadership deviated to such a point, and it devolved to such a point that it did not have credibility to be a source of guidance and leadership. Forget in piety and spirituality, even in matters of law. Even in the basic questions of Islam, nobody would go to the Khalifa. Nobody would go to that leadership that was chosen from the path of Saqifa. So those who rejected imamat, then eventually the consensus within their school says that you need to have a murshid who is pious. Not just a student of fiqh, not just a student of theology, not just a person with political power, but somebody whose authority is through their connection to Allah. And then they will pledge allegiance and they will take their guidance from that person and they will obey that person without question. In principle, that is all right. But the problem is, who is this murshid that you are pledging allegiance to? It is somebody who is not ma'soom, who is not appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And maybe they have certain clothing, a white beard, certain prestige, dhikr, or actions that they do, but they are not appointed by Allah. And they have not attained that state of perfection that makes them worthy of that obedience. So what does it tell you? It tells you that the teaching of Ahlul Bayt was so effective in setting the tone of what Islam must be, that even those who rejected imamat and those who rejected the imam could not escape the fact that the allegiance of Saqifa failed. The leadership even of a scholar of religious law failed. The leadership of those with political authority or with a collection of ahadith that they had memorized or legal rulings that they had derived has failed. And there is something else that is needed. But because they didn't recognize the imam and they did not submit to imamat, they crafted another form of imamat modeled on what the Ahlul Bayt were given by Allah, but that lacked its essence and that which made it worthy of emulation, and that was the imam appointed by Allah Himself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now do you see in what way Abu Hanifa or Malik or Shafi'i or Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they were still in debt to Imam Jafar al-Sadiq and his students, not because they accepted his teachings or his guidance on specific areas of Islamic law or Islamic doctrine. They just considered him to be one scholar among others. Sometimes they accepted, and at other times, na'udhu billah, they rejected the ahadith and the teachings of the Imam. But the nature of Islam within which they were operating, and the very fact that scholarship was respected and was transmitted, for that they were in debt to Ahlul Bayt, and they were in debt to Imam Jafar as-Sadiq. Just as the Sufis may have rejected imamat, and they may have rejected the true imam appointed by Allah, but in their system of bay'ah and in their system of seeking spiritual guidance from what they consider to be a perfect role model and guide, they were operating within the concepts that came from Ahlul Bayt, that showed that a pure legal school or a pure school of theology does not represent Islam. You can say that Sunnism today is in many ways a compromise from the extreme rejection of Ahlul Bayt that took place in the time of the companions and in the time of the first caliphs. It is a partial retreat, and that retreat was because Ahlul Bayt, without an army, without the wealth and the power of the caliphs, but just through the power of their character and their teachings, were able to show that there is no political power or no outward school of Islam that can represent the truth and the guidance of this faith. So how did Imam Jafar as-Sadiq do that? How did Imam Jafar as-Sadiq make that miraculous transformation? Well, first of all, there was a foundation built by the previous Imams. So Imam Muhammad Baqir is known as Baqirul Ilm because he split the earth and planted the seeds of knowledge. And all of those scholars and all of those students who spread the teachings of Ahlul Bayt in the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, they began their studies for the most part in the time of his father, our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now by the time of our sixth Imam, those seeds had grown into strong and very flourishing trees that could bear fruit. And what our sixth Imam did is he taught people how it is possible to build a community rooted in faith. That is what our sixth Imam did. The teachings, they were the teachings of our Prophet. They had been preserved and they had been spread on a limited scale by the previous Imams. But in the time of our sixth Imam, those seeds that had been planted before, particularly in the time of the fifth Imam, now they began to give fruit, and the Imam created a community on the basis of faith. And in conclusion, I would just like to mention a few points of how the Imam built that community. How should you and I interact in order to see the wisdom of what Ahlul Bayt did? The first teaching is a hadith narrated from our sixth Imam. It is reported that the Imam addressed his Shia. What happens when you have scholarship? Those of you who study Islam, you have opinions. And especially if you are a beginning student, this is a tendency that we start to become very firmly attached to what I think is right. So sometimes I hear people who are not fluent in Arabic, for example, and have not formally studied Islam, but they're very quick to say that, yeah, so-and-so might be a marji' al-taqlid, so-and-so might be a great scholar. Maybe they spent 70 years studying and teaching Islam, but they're wrong. Why? Because I spent the last few years taking a class maybe every evening, or I read through the translation of a book by Sheikh Sadiq, or I think that I have my own opinion. We all have a right to a question. We don't have a right to an opinion unless we are qualified to express our opinion. So when you have scholarship, when you have Baqirul Ulum spreading the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, and not just the teachings but the culture of scholarship that was also affecting the general culture of the Muslims among the non-Shi'i Muslims. What happens? You have strong opinions. And naturally, you start to hear people say, I'm right, you're wrong. This is the right way to pray, your way is wrong. This is the right belief, your belief is wrong. Now, if you have scholarship, but then everybody becomes an island to themselves, and we can't unite with each other, then we become splintered. And our collective power and effectiveness as a community is compromised. Because we can't even come together in a masjid. We will say, this has one label, that has one label. So, Imam Jafar Sadiq spread the knowledge, but then he reminded people that our school is a school that is not just rooted in book learning. The strength and the unity of our school is through Ahlul Bayt. And so we don't have to become arrogant. The Imam is reported to have said, مَا أَنْتُمْ وَالْبَرَاءَ يَبْرَأُ بَعْضُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. A very beautiful hadith in Usul al-Kafi. What is it with you and condemning each other? Some of you who are followers of the Imam, you say, this person is wrong, that person is wrong, I condemn that person, I condemn that person. يَبْرَأُ بَعْضُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. The Imam says that some believers are better than others. بَعْضُكُمْ أَكْثَرُ صَلَاةً مِنْ بَعْضٍ وَبَعْضُكُمْ أَنْفَضُ بَصَرًا مِنْ بَعْضٍ وَهِيَ الدَّرَجَاتِ. There is no universal or absolute right or wrong other than the ma'asumeen. The ma'asumeen, everything they say, they teach, they do is right. And those who oppose or fight Ahlul Bayt, then you don't need to say, well, there was a little bit of good. You know, there were conquests and there was a golden age of Islam. If you are an opponent of Ahlul Bayt, then that is an evil that covers up whatever good you may do. It cannot be whitewashed. But beyond that, then we shouldn't think that we know everything that is right, or somebody who disagrees with me is absolutely wrong. And so one of the things that our sixth Imam taught is don't do bara'ah from each other if you are followers of Ahlul Bayt. ما أنتم والبراء يبرأ بعضكم من بعض. Recognize that maybe there is somebody who is praying and that is part of their soul and their worship and their sincerity. بعضكم أكثر صلاة من بعض. But that doesn't mean that their insight in terms of knowledge and in terms of social affairs is as great as somebody else. وَبَعْضُكُمْ أَنْفَضُ بَصَرًا مِّن بَعْضٍ. And there are different levels that believers have. And this teaching of our sixth Imam is very beautifully expressed in a saying of one of the companions of our eighth Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salam, by the name of Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And this is a lengthy hadith. In the interest of time, I will just abbreviate it. Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman studied, and therefore he gained a great deal of knowledge and he taught. And when you teach people what they don't want to hear, the authentic teachings of Ahlul Bayt, in many cases you make enemies. And there are more people to come and condemn you than there are to support or thank you. And that weighed heavily on the heart of Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman. And he came to Imam Rida alayhi salam with that, not complaint, but with that expression of pain that I devoted my life to the service and the guidance of these believers, but I hear so much condemnation. Many of you might get burned out. I know volunteers in our centers, sometimes they get burned out because they hear so much negative feedback. Sometimes people, they feel like, you know what, I'm going to give up and I'll just be a good believer on my own because it's too frustrating to deal with people. Now, if we are those people giving the negative feedback, let's lighten up a little bit and show appreciation and gratitude to our volunteers, to our teachers, to those people who are supporting our community. But if I'm on the other side and I'm about to get frustrated, the 8th Imam said to Yunus that if you have a gem in your hand and the whole world comes and tries to convince you that it's a worthless pebble, is it a pebble or is it a gem? It is a gem. And if you have a pebble in your hand and the whole world comes and says that what a valuable gem, in the end it is still a worthless pebble. If you throw it on the ground, you won't be able to distinguish it from any other pebble. So don't be so encouraged by the praise of the people of this world, and don't be discouraged by their condemnation or their criticism or their lack of appreciation. And then the next expression from Yunus, it is an expression of what our Imam taught, that don't be so quick to condemn somebody if they are a lover of Ahlul Bayt. Yunus said that all of those people who fought me, all of those people who made false accusations against me, I testify and I call Allah to be my witness, that I leave their affair to Amir al-Mu'mineen. If they have the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, then I have no grudge against them on the Day of Judgment. That anybody who is a lover and a follower of Ahlul Bayt, anybody who is a lover of Amir al-Mu'mineen, that person deserves to be forgiven by me, even if I may have been hurt or offended by what they did. That is the source of the humility and the forgiveness that we have for our fellow believers in spite of our disagreements or even ignorance or hurt that we may experience. It is our mutual connection and love for Ahlul Bayt. And the second and the last teaching of our 6th Imam that I will mention is a very beautiful hadith. We have similar hadith from our 5th Imam and other Imams, but in a detailed version it is from our 6th Imam, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And this is also in Usulul Kafi. The Imam says that there are 10 steps to faith. Iman has 10 steps, like the steps of a ladder. And sometimes when I am on one step, I look to somebody who is a little bit less practicing. Maybe their hijab is not as good as mine. Maybe their prayer is not as good as mine. And I may look down on them and say, you know, I'm better than this person. And I am superior. Now, superiority is poison to our piety. It also doesn't play well in society. Even if you're not religious, if you can tell that a person is arrogant, you will be repelled by that person's character. Our secular society solves that problem by saying that no one's better than anybody else. You can't judge. No one's better than anybody else. Everybody is good in their own way. But that is not a true solution. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. There are different degrees. Hum darajatun indallah. They have different degrees and different levels and different stages of closeness to Allah. The solution is not to say everyone is equal. Some people are stronger than others. Some people have more book smarts and intelligence than others. Some people, they may be good at managing money, other people are not good at managing money. To deny that there are those differences and those stages and those degrees is not a service to the person who is better, nor a service to those who are at a lower stage of competence or experience. What is the solution given to us by Ahlul Bayt? They said that recognize there are degrees. You are above somebody in your faith, but you are also below somebody in your faith. The solution to arrogance is not to deny those differences. The solution to arrogance is to be humble. And when I see somebody who is beneath me in their practice or in their knowledge, then look to those who are above me. لا تسقط من هو أسفل منك فيسقطك من هو أعلى منك. Don't deny the goodness of those who are beneath you, because then you will be worthy of being denied by those who are above you. So humility is the solution, not a denial of the rank and the degree. Because it's only when I recognize that there are degrees of faith that I am motivated to be better. If I say everyone is good and no one is better than one another, what motivation do I have to become better? And then very beautifully the Imam says, when you see somebody who is beneath you, فَارْفَعْهُ إِلَيْكَ بِرِفْقٍ. Gently bring them up. Because if you don't bring them up, then you are not a good friend, a good brother, or a good sister. You should want to bring them up and lift them and make them better. We all want to make each other better, but do so gently, birifq. Because if you don't do it gently, the Imam says that that person will snap. If this community is not welcoming, and a sister comes in and she feels judged for her hijab, or a brother comes in and feels judged because he isn't familiar with how to pray, or a child feels judged, or a parent feels that their children are judged because they don't know how to behave in the masjid, maybe it's the first time they've come and they're not familiar, then they will snap, they will go, and they might not come back. And then the Imam says, فَإِنَّ مَنْ كَسَرَ مُؤْمِنًا فَعَلَيْهِ جَبْرُ. And if you cause a believer to snap, don't say, well, at least I did my part, I taught them what was needed, I did a good thing. You broke it, you have to fix it. And it is exceedingly difficult to fix. This was the beautiful character and teaching of our sixth Imam. And his martyrdom was a tragedy unlike any other tragedy in Islam for the Muslim community of his time. Just to understand the depth of the tragedy of the Imam's death. Normally when one Imam would die, he would make a wasiyah for his successor. Imam Ali, he made a will in favor of Imam Hassan. Imam Hassan on his deathbed, he made a will in favor of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein made his will in Karbala in favor of Imam Zainul Abidin. Imam Zainul Abidin made his will for his son Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. But so severe was the oppression faced by Imam Jafar al-Sadiq that now in Ahlul Bayt's history for the first time we see that yes, he made his true wasiyah for the Imam after him, but publicly he was not able to make that wasiyah. Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the caliph in Baghdad, he had a messenger. When the news came of the martyrdom of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, he pretended that he was grieved, he cried, and then he called his messenger. He said that go to Medina and find out who did Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq make a will to, and whoever he made his will for, kill that person, strike their neck immediately, so that there will be no Imam after the sixth Imam, and it will come to an end. That messenger came to Medina, but Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq was guided by Allah. When he asked who did the Imam make his will for, he was told that there are 5 people whom the Imam made a will to. One is Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the caliph himself. One is Muhammad ibn Sulaiman, the governor of Medina appointed by Mansur. One is his son Abdullah al-Aftah. One is his son Musa al-Kadhim. And one is the mother of our 7th Imam, Humayda al-Barbariya or Hamida al-Barbariya. Now these 5 people were made as the recipients of the will of the Imam, because it was to protect the life of our 7th Imam. But in the words of Abu Hamza al-Thumali, an elderly companion and lover of Ahlul Bayt who survived to that time, he said that Imam Jafar al-Sadiq made it clear for us who is the Imam after him. Because Abu Jafar al-Mansur and the governor of Medina, they were only added to the list to protect the life of the Imam. When the elder son Abdullah al-Aftah is mentioned, if he were the Imam, there is no need to mention the younger son, Musa al-Kadhim. The mention of Musa al-Kadhim and the mention of the mother of Imam Musa al-Kadhim, Humayda al-Barbariya, tells us that the true recipient of the will, the wasi of our Imam, is his son Imam Musa al-Kadhim, and everyone else was mentioned just to preserve the life. This was how severe the oppression of our 6th Imam was. It is said that Mansur poisoned the Imam through grapes that were fed to the Imam, and when he was on his deathbed, weak with the effect of that poison, he called all of his family and all of his loved ones together, and he made certain bequests and reminders to them, some for his family, some for his Shia, some of a general nature for all Muslims. It was at this time when the Imam would sometimes go unconscious, and then when he would have some strength, he would speak and he would give his messages to his family and to his followers. When the Imam said, "La tanalu shafa'atuna mustakhifan bis-salah," our intercession will not be attained by those who take their prayers lightly and don't give importance to their prayers. May all of us give value and importance to our prayers. The Imam made that wasiyah, and he would go unconscious, and then gradually, as his strength left him, he bid farewell to his family, and it was as if Qiyamah arose in the entire city of Medina that the Imam had been martyred. Indeed, it was a grave tragedy. But our 6th Imam was surrounded by his family. He was in his own home on his deathbed. We would go and we would turn our hearts towards Karbala, and we would say that, "Oh, our master, Sayyidul Shuhada, how was it for you in your final moments, that when you came to bid farewell to the Imam after yourself, your body was covered in wounds, your beard was red with the blood of Ali Asghar, and your son was sick with fever so that he could not even stand. When he looked towards your face, he said, 'Oh, my father, truly is it you that I am looking at? For I don't know how long it is that I was unconscious with fever. Oh, my father, now when I look at you, I see that the light has come out from your eyes. I see that your back is bent. I see that your hair is white.' And the Imam may have answered that, 'Oh, my son, when I stood over the dead body of my brother Abbas, it was as if my back was broken and I cannot stand up straight after that. Oh, my son, when I saw the body of my son Ali Akbar was martyred in the battlefield, trampled under the horses of the enemy, then the light left my eyes because I could not bear to see that sight. And I said, "Oh, Ali Akbar, keep speaking to me so I may know in which direction your martyred body lies." And oh, my son, when I held the body of Ali Akbar in my hands and he was martyred, then not a black hair remained on the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. O Allah, accept this remembrance of the teachings and the sufferings of Ahlul Bayt on our behalf. We owe a great debt to Ahlul Bayt, and in particular to Imam Jafar as-Sadiq. He protected all of Islam, and in particular, he protected his Shia and his followers from deviation. Our school of law is the Ja'fari school. Our school of doctrine and theology is what we learn from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. Our spirituality is not from some Sufi sheikh, but it is what we learned from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. He preserved and brought to us the teachings of his forefathers and the teachings of our Prophet. O Allah, elevate the rank of Ahlul Bayt and grant them your greatest bounties and blessings for all that they gave us, and they revived our bodies and our souls. O Allah, count us among the true lovers of Ahlul Bayt, who are happy because of their happiness and sad because of their sadness, who love them, remember them, learn from them, follow them, and obey them. And O Allah, the heir of our sixth Imam, who is alive today, and the one who is the host of this majlis, and the one who is the aggrieved party, is the Imam of our time, Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari. O Allah, we await him and he awaits us. O Allah, bless our existence and honor our eyes with the sight of the Imam of our time, with the unfurling of his divine flag, and with the spread of his message through every corner of the earth. O Allah, hasten the appearance of our Imam. If we live to see the day when he comes, may we be foremost among his followers. And if we do not survive until that time, then grant us the company and the intercession of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad in the hereafter, and their eternal company in Jannah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.